Alright, so that was 15 seconds on Provia. It's a pretty cool subject. Depth of field is a challenge because there's a lot of depth to it. If I just use some front tilt, stop down to f45, and I'll get what I get. But I'm going to expose a little bit more film as the light continues to change, but the sunlight is just now starting to hit telescope peak there. So I'll have a pretty good window of more light, but it's a nice low directional light coming kind of in from that direction there. But pretty cool. Well, that sure was a great way to get the morning going. I ended up exposing 3 sheets of Provia 100F on this scene, and exposure times for the first one, it was 15 seconds, the second was 10, the last was 5 seconds, so they're all going to be about the same. There's going to be no real changes between them. The light was pretty decent on all of them. The earlier exposures will have a little bit more of a low angle light, and then the later exposures will have just a bit more of a just kind of soft overall lighting. So the wind was cooperative, which was great, and it was a little tricky getting the camera set up when I first got here because it was very dark, and the lens I'm using, it's a 240mm f9 lens, so which means I have a pretty dim ground glass on it, and so I use my headlamp to help out to point the camera in the right direction, but then as it got a little brighter I could see the composition better, and I'll have a hard time getting everything in focus, but you know, it is what it is. But definitely feels good to expose some film. I'm gonna get things packed up, head back to an area kind of where I was yesterday and check out a canyon I haven't been into before. So I'll be good to check that out. But man, oh man, always feels great to start the day exposing some film. Well, this canyon certainly did not disappoint. Absolutely beautiful. Got these slate blue walls, really beautiful glows. And the walls have these really interesting shapes and curves, and it's unlike any of the canyons I've seen in the Southwest. So I don't plan on taking any photos here on this trip. This is more so just an opportunity to get to know the area, spend a little time, and try to figure out what kind of subjects and compositions I might be able to do with the 8x10, because depth of field and dynamic range are both pretty big limitations when I'm shooting 8x10. But absolutely beautiful here. And I definitely will be coming back here next year. Well, it is now about 3:30 in the afternoon, and I have returned to the sand dunes. And this is an area that I actually walked right past on the first day of my trip, and I really loved this cracked mud here and all the patterns and textures it has. And I logged it into my GPS, figuring that at some point on this trip I'd like to photograph it, and figured this would be a great evening for it because we have blue skies, the wind is calm, and so I set up a composition using my 240mm lens, which is a lens I use a lot. I just really like that focal length. It's about the same focal length as the default camera on the iPhone. So if you see something that looks pretty good on the iPhone, it's going to compose pretty well on there. But it's a pretty straightforward shot in terms of getting everything focused, a little bit of front tilt. It's a very contrasty subject, so this light that it's in right now is pretty intense. My goal is primarily a blue hour photo of this scene, to have some directional light coming from the left here, but very soft overall. And I think what'll happen is the areas between the mud tiles I think will stand out a lot more in the blue hour light. And also I want to try to get one of those photos right when the sun is just halfway behind the horizon, because you get some directional yet soft light during that time as well. And so that's gonna be my goal. It's about an hour or so until sunset, or at least until the sun drops back behind the mountains. So I'm just gonna fine tune the composition a little bit more, get things set up, and see about exposing a little more film this evening. All right, so that was 6 seconds when probably a little less than half the sun was lighting the scene. And now it's gonna be a very flat light, and the next window of light is gonna be more toward the blue hour, which is after the sun has dropped a little bit further, and now we have at a certain point, this side of the sky starts getting really bright. This side gets pretty dark as the earth shadow comes up, and I'll do some longer exposures during that time, and that's probably going to be the nicer light. It's going to be a soft glow that's really low angle, coming from this direction right here, sort of skimming over the scene. So it'll be interesting to see how they both turn out. This one, I don't know, it might still be too much contrast for it, but those moments, they just go by so fast. So it's kind of cool to capture that little bit when the sun is dropping below the horizon, and everyone's like a little experiment. There you go, 50 seconds. So this is the phase when the light is a little bit on the magenta side, so the transparency might be a little bit magenta. I can tweak that a little bit if I want to reduce that. Debating whether I should do one more. I mean, I feel good with that exposure. I think I'm going to do one more for when the magenta lowers a little. So I dropped down to f32 from f45, which puts me back at 40 seconds. Because what happens at a certain point, the exposure times start getting really long, really fast, and you can't chase it with a long shutter. Two. 50 seconds again. Well, that seemed to work pretty well. It's absolutely calm right now, and really nice gradient of warm light coming from the west. And then we've got the earth shadow that rose from the east. So you have warm and cool light, and you have it where it just skims the ground. And even though this is a very highly textured mud crack area, you have this warm dimensional light. And it'll be interesting to see how the film renders it. Early on, the light goes a little bit magenta, and then it starts to cool down a little bit, and you have more so just the warm and cool thing. So I think one of the sheets of film will be a little bit on the magenta side. The one I exposed more recently is probably a little bit more neutral, but we'll see. This is one of those photos where I honestly have no clue how this is going to turn out. It could look like crap, it could be cool, but this is how I learn, and that's kind of the whole thing about when I go on these trips. I honestly have no clue how the photos are going to turn out. Some of them might have a little bit of a decent feeling, but it's not until I see it on the light box I really know if the technique was good, if the light was good, if the subject was good, the composition and everything else. But now I'm going to get things packed up. I'm going to head back to camp, and I have this is my last full day here in Death Valley. There is one photo I want to shoot this morning, or not this morning, but tomorrow morning, of a scene. It's just kind of some subdued reflected light from bouncing off the mountains from the west. Will give it some pretty nice soft light. So I figure I'll shoot that and then make my way home. And it's about a 6.5 hour drive or so. So I should get home by kind of mid-afternoon. So it has been a really cool trip this year. I did a lot of exploring these blue skies, make you get a little creative. Can't just fall back on the normal clouds in the sky and cool looking foreground. So, but I should probably get things packed up before it gets too dark here and make my way back to my truck. Unlike those past trips to Death Valley that ended in frustration, this one ended with a soft click of a shutter under a clear blue sky. My soul filled with warmth from the surrounding silence. After spending 8 days in the desert, it was time to head home. Although I liked the composition of the photo that morning, the soft light isn't as dynamic as I had hoped. I'll have to revisit this scene next year and try for a photo with evening light. The blue hour photo of the mud cracks went very magenta, and although I can restore the original color in Photoshop, I prefer the photo taken earlier that evening, just as the sun dipped behind the mountains. I was quick to dismiss this photo during the film reveal, but I've come to appreciate the balance of warm and cool light, and how the gaps between cracked mud stand out so wonderfully. This photo reminds me of city lights from above, and I'm glad I returned to this subject on my final evening, a subject I found on the very first day of my trip. Another favorite of mine is the photo of the desert holly bush. Of the 3 sheets of film I exposed that morning, the first has the best light. I'm glad I put forth the effort to set up my camera in the dark and to use my headlamp to help establish the composition. The depth of field is indeed quite shallow, but the most important parts are in focus, and that's all that matters. Thanks as always for watching, and we'll see you around next time. If you enjoy this ad-free and clickbait-free content and want to help me live my dream, a voluntary contribution of just $24 a year helps keep my gas tank full and my film freezer stocked. For more information on how to support me and my work, please visit the donation section of my website at benhorn.com/donate. I also have prints in my portfolio box set available on my website. You can find a direct link down below in the show notes. Thanks in advance for your support.